Hello, hi everybody. Hey everyone, hello. I still have a zit on my nose, I think. You can see it probably. Hi everyone, welcome to House Calls. It is Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd. I cannot believe we are a month into 2021. And I'm guessing that Laura says, oh, can't hear you. Huh. Okay. We've not had that in a while. Let's see what's happening. Gabby, can you hear me?
Let me turn it on my phone.
I can't. Can you hear me now? Sound is good now. We're back. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Thanks for letting me know that you could hear me, everybody. And also, Laura, thank you for letting me know you couldn't hear me. Hi, everybody. Welcome to House Calls. Today is February 3rd, Wednesday. We are beginning of second month of 2021. So hopefully we will be off to a much better start, which is very exciting. And we are just coming out of our post-nor'easter. We had a nor'easter here in New York City, in the Northeast. And so we are sort of digging ourselves out. And it was a very relaxing beginning to the week, I have to say. It really slowed us all down. Not that we were moving so fast to begin with, but it really does. Snow in New York City does kind of slow everything down. So today I'm really excited because we are going to be talking to our first ever landscape architect. And this is something I really want to do more as we're diversifying, also just sort of broadening our scope of design from interior design, architecture, landscape design. Our first and foremost is an amazing gal, Janice Parker. She is a New York-based landscape designer. Her work is incredible. It's really beautiful and natural and elegant and pastoral and just kind of very sophisticated, understated, but just precise and classic and timeless and very clean and natural, which is kind of what I love. So I am super excited to have her be a part of House Calls. So let's just see if we can find Miss Janice. There we are. Found her. Is in the house. And very excited to talk to her.
Am I there?
Hi, Janice. How are you?
I'm good. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you.
Oh,
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so excited. First of all, you do realize that you are our first landscape designer, and we're very excited. And one of the reasons that, the reason is that we love your work. There's a very small handful of landscape designers that we love, and your work is, I think, super elegant, very timeless, and just very appropriate and very natural, but so elegant and sophisticated and just beautiful. So I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm putting you up for a project.
Oh, I'm blushing.
Yeah.
That's the night you have made my week.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. And well, first of all, where are you? You're in the city?
Actually, no, I'm in my Greenwich office, which is right on the main street across from Whole Foods. For those of you who know Greenwich, most people know Whole Foods.
Yes, I do.
And we got plowed out, and it really, I agree with you. It was a delicious beginning of the week to have some snowy days.
Well, I was just talking to my friend John earlier today, who I grew up with and who also works in design and lives in New York City, he and his wife and his daughter. And we were laughing. It was like, if you're going to have a snowstorm, it's really nice to have it on a Sunday night, because Mondays are, it kind of gives them an opportunity to kind of get things sorted Sunday night, and it makes the beginning of the week a little bit slower and gives everybody a little sort of buffer. People were not either working or working from home, or or just sort of starting their day a little bit later. And then yesterday was even a little bit like, not every light was on in every office, so it was kind of, it was like kind of a nice. And then today's everyone's back, so it was kind of that perfect graduation. But so you guys got hit pretty hard out in Greenwich, no?
Yes, and the best part is that you get the snow.
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm certainly old to do it, but I am a snow angel.
I am a
Knitter.
snow angel as well. I love it. And that was going to be one of my questions for you was going to be, I love bad weather.
Adore.
I
That's
love
why
it.
I live here.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
going
I
to close
really
my
like,
window because it might be loud.
I know it's a strange thing to admit that we like, but I remember when I was in college, um, Janice, I was just saying when I was in college and I was living on Nantucket in the summer, whenever
Ah,
storms would come in, right? Like two of my friends and I would go down to where the ferry dock, and which is kind of ironic now, but we would go to the ferry dock and we would literally just kind of like lean into the wind, when the big storms would come,
yes.
and we were like had all our foul weather gear on, and we were ready for it. But it was just kind of a fun moment to like sort of see the storm come in and like. So I mean, just like those kind of moments that were, or growing up and going to summer camp, that was also kind of fun to see the storms come across the lake and, or whatever,
It's the
Florida, when it's
best.
those 5-minute storms in Florida that are kind of crazy. But yeah, and snowstorms growing up, I love them. Again, it was like, I think I missed school usually not because our school was closed. It was just because I was so exhausted from following the news until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to find out if we weren't going to go to school, that I wasn't physically capable. So,
Well,
but yeah, so I was wondering if like, weather as a landscape, professional and someone who's, really built such an incredible career in that space, um, weather plays a major role into probably how you approach design and with the location and all of those things, correct?
it does. It
Yeah.
absolutely does. And you make me think of one of my favorite songs growing up was Lena Horne's Stormy Weather.
Yeah.
And I just love stormy weather.
Yes.
And weather is, I mean, when people say, how do you know if there's magic? How do you prove to me there's magic? It's the weather.
It's the weather.
Need I
Yeah.
say more?
Right. I agree with you. And it's what happens in those moments just before really, sort of bizarre weather happens. There's this kind of very magical kind of moment.
It is
So
magic.
I
No
agree.
one can actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
It can't be controlled.
It's electric. It quite literally, you know what I mean, at a certain level.
Oh, it is.
It's kind of
the
amazing.
energy
That's
of
so
it
cool. I
is-
love that. That's really cool. So let me I want to go back a little bit because I want to bring one of the things that we do is we kind of bring everybody sort of back into sort of, the young years of Janice and all the designers that come on here and sort of how you found your way into sort of what you're doing. And I know a little bit about your journey, but I wanted to, you grew up in New York City, right? And what was that like in terms of schooling and being a young person? And maybe were you creative as a young person? Were you already thinking about design at some level when you were growing up?
Yeah, my very first memory. So we would, my father was a law professor at NYU, and but when I was young and growing up, my parents were struggling. But we would go to some sort of an environment in the summer. There was always a way to get a summer cottage or a summer house in those days that was affordable. And my very first memory is of a flower. I must have been about 18 months old, and it was the size of my head. So I'm pretty sure it was a peony. And I'm pretty sure it had to be. And I was absolutely in love with the outdoors, with nature. And I think that there was this element of myself that I kept very quiet to myself because I felt like I could recognize the magic.
Right.
And I didn't think that would go over very well.
Right. Well, it's interesting. And, I grew up outside of the city in upstate New York. And my brother also lives in New York City, lives on the Upper East Side. And he has 2 girls that go to school in the city. And then they have a house outside of the city in the Hamptons. And the interesting thing is, I wonder, it's always, there's this kind of dialogue about having grown up, in sort of the small city in the country, in the suburbs versus, growing up in a big city. And I wonder, sometimes, having that extreme from extreme urbanism to extreme sort of going out and seeing sort of nature. And then also the celebration of nature at that time when you were growing up, Central Park, and it still is, but there's so many other experiences. But Central Park was a real celebration of nature. And I think, you know, you have to seek it out, you know, as a New Yorker.
That's
you know,
right.
we all do that. And I do that. I have a house up on a lake in the Finger Lakes. And so we seek it out. And I think, interestingly, this year during COVID, I experienced, having been in my house since January, it was the first time since March, I was in my house for basically all of winter, all of spring, all of summer, and into the fall. I have not experienced seeing what I saw in nature every day since I was a little kid. And it was very interesting to see that. And I wonder, you know, I was used to going out to my house and seeing, like, there was no ferns and then there were ferns. I didn't see like this and then this and then this, and, you know, and I didn't see it sort of happening. And how remarkable it was every day, because I was out there and I'm like, oh my God, they're like a foot now. And it's only been like 3 days since we saw them peeking out of the ground. So I do think that there's a different relationship sometimes people have with nature because of the environment that they're growing up in and their exposure to it. So when you were young and you were going out into nature, it was probably, you know, because of that, you know, it was happening not every day, maybe. It was a real memory for you.
It was very strong. And we also traveled the West Side Highway all the time to go to wherever we were going.
Yes.
And I knew every single tree, you know, every single one. And I could actually draw them out when we looked at that, because I work with New York Restoration Project a lot.
Yes.
And I wanted to redo that cherry tree planting so badly, because I remember exactly where they were. And there are old maps, and I've been able to really look at that. And it also, you do see the seasons change in New York. You just have to look for it.
You just have to see it, right? You have to look for it.
You have to look for it. You have to look for it. And I was always one that, you know, I wanted half of the refrigerator so I could put my bulbs in there. And I, you know, always had house plants. And I was a florist first from the time I was, maybe 12.
Really? Oh my God, that's amazing.
I worked for Rennie when it was just Rennie. And we decorated Studio 54. And like, I don't know how I was old enough to do it in 78 and 79. But I mean, creating those environments.
That's an amazing place to have worked. That is really an amazing place to have worked at Rennie. I mean, that's like.
And people to have worked with.
Yeah. I mean, what a great experience.
People to have worked with who, so many of them did not, you know, live out their careers, who were so talented. Jed Johnson used to come into the shop all the time. You know, Angelo Dongia, and you know, I mean, I met all these people, and I studied how they were so distinguished at such a young age.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Jed, I remember Jed. I do remember Jed really well. He was a really impressive person.
Such an eye.
Such an eye, and it was very forward at a time. He was doing things. He was always like kind of one step ahead of the curve. And an interesting historical sort of, you know, and it was sort of the same way he carried himself, was the way he sort of did his.
Very dapper.
Yeah, very clean and timeless.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. And so when you were sort of moving on in schooling, was this something that you knew were you already onto landscape architecture?
I was, and I moved right into the working world, and I went back. That's what I'm very self-taught. I went back. I didn't have an MA in landscape architecture. I didn't actually. I was working at such a young age. I didn't actually finish school. I went back and had to qualify to be able to sit for my national board exams. It was rather challenging. I had to petition the state capitol to be able to sit for the national board exams. And it was a very difficult experience for me because I wasn't used to taking tests. But I was already, you know, in New York in the 70s and that era, which a lot of people talk about that New York wasn't a great place. It was what I knew. Do you know what I mean? And it was a great place, actually, because it was very porous. You could do anything. You could go sit backstage at the Fillmore East. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At 12, which we did. and meet everybody. You could also walk in and almost get a job anywhere. Betsy Johnson had just opened up her first store.
It felt very it was very raw, and it was very kind of, it was very self-made at that point. Things were,
you could actually, you know, I mean, you could just enter into a profession and you could just walk in, and and the doors were wide open in so many ways, and it was just amazing. It seemed to me that if you had an interest in something, suddenly you were doing it, you know. I mean, you know, I liked doing flowers. Suddenly I was decorating these giant parties at the Saint and at Studio 54, and working with people who were just
incredibly
beyond
talented.
compare. You know, just so distinct.
By the way, it does. I mean, I would beg to differ when you say that you weren't formally trained. I would almost say that you were very formally trained based on that. I mean, that's the experience that most parents look for their children to be able to get out of. You know, the most important things I think that happen to kids when they go away to school is that there's this great opportunity to sort of go out into a different world and socialize and sort of know how to figure out who you are. That's the first thing, becoming comfortable in your skin. And then also having the opportunity to intern in a space that is what you're sort of working towards. So I think those are those two things to me that are so important from that experience, overarchingly important. And it seems to me that's what you did on your own. You did that intuitively.
And you're interning, but suddenly you become manager because everyone is passed out in the walk-in cooler when you come into work. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly it's like, you know, oh, you're a manager now. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I can figure this out.
Baptism by fire, I guess, right? That's sort of what
not to name names, but a very famous florist I was doing freelance for, and we were doing a rooftop garden for the Javitzes.
Yeah.
Right? And Marion Javits, and she turned to one of the centerpieces, and she said she didn't like it. So the gentleman I was working for said, "Oh, you don't like it?" He picked it up and he tossed it off.
That's hilarious.
Like, okay.
That's hilarious. Now, wait a minute. Now, at some point, I do know that you also, I know that you were involved with Parsons at some point, and also that you went and you were also worked in England with John Brooks.
John Brooks, who was my mentor and my love.
Yes. And so tell us about those experiences and how that came about and how that has affected kind of getting you on this path.
Well, I knew that we were doing landscaping. We were doing terraces. We were doing a lot. And Rennie is actually a licensed landscape architect. Yep. And he said, you don't want to do this if you don't learn it right, because you can get into all kinds of trouble with this. This has to live. And I knew he was right. So I went on a tour of some of the most beautiful English gardens on my own with a friend one year. And I think it was 84. And I went to John Brooks's garden and met him. It's a gravel garden in the south of England. And it was magic. I just knew it was magic. And he was giving a course. Mm-hmm. And I signed up for it and went right back. And he was so funny. When I arrived, he said, I knew I'd see you again, but not quite this soon. and he was giving it in his house. He ended up at Kew Gardens teaching. But at lunchtime, we were in his house. He would serve us wine and lunch. And it was the most incredible experience. And I stayed there for a couple of months with him. And then I went back to visit him very often. And in the last few years, he died 2 years ago, but in the last few years when he was failing, I would go once a year to be with him. And a lovely woman named Gwendolyn Van Passion has taken over the garden and brought it back. Right. And I'm in touch with her. And it's one of the most beautiful gardens I think there is, and it's coming back into really good shape. It's back on the list of gardens to visit. It's fallen into disrepair, certainly.
And when you were touring the gardens, right, and you're there, what were your takeaways? What were the things that you were? I mean, I think a lot of times people that are not familiar with landscape design or just know that it looks beautiful, they don't understand sort of the architectural part of it, or the sort of the engineering and sort of the thoughtfulness of how things are sort of, you're telling a story. There's a narrative. It's you're building walls and rooms and spaces, and you're creating hierarchy, and you're creating, you're framing views, and you're doing all of these things. Were you seeing that at that age, or were you just starting to understand
Yes.
it? You were
Yeah,
seeing.
it's a very instinctive, there's a real intuition and understanding, you know,
Yeah.
if you are in that, open
Yes.
to that,
Right.
where the interlocking of the architecture, the interlocking of the gardens, the relationship, the use, the purpose, the meaning. Because in America, you know, you see mostly suburban gardens or parks, but
Yeah.
not the meaningful gardens that actually have incredible use. Really, I mean, let's face it, there's like, it's a beautiful thing to be able to work on beautiful homes. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
just one of the most wonderful experiences to
Yeah.
create beautiful homes for people.
Right.
And
I
and
agree.
their great experience too, right? And to see this way that it all had come up over history and why and the meaning of it, but
Right.
also the textures, the play of textures, the look of not being too manicured,
Yeah.
and the understanding of really having a backbone, and you know how, especially with John Brooks, playing with color and playing, you know, it really led from sort of doing these phenomenal, huge flower arrangements
Right.
and plays to looking at how that's done in a long-term way, right?
Right.
So I was looking at everything as a painting,
Right.
and how you have the mid, you know, the foreground, the midground, and the background, and
Right.
you see almost like Beth Chatto, who's a famous English gardener. You know, she'll, let's say you have a beautiful mountain ridge and a few big trees on the left and some smaller trees on the right. She would repeat that pattern in her plantings in the shrubs, and then in her perennial plantings, and even in a pot of flowers, it would be playing with that
Right.
same composition. And
Right.
you don't know it if you're not looking for it, but
Right.
you feel it.
Well, you feel it.
Feels,
Well, so
feels right, you
that's
know?
one of the things I was going to ask you. It's so interesting because I often say that, you know, I think that I always talk about balance in design, and there's there's a relationship between symmetry and asymmetry and balance and order and sort of disorder, you know, sort of playing with all of these kind of elements. But I think when you sort of hit the right notes and you kind of create that sort of narrative properly, where it feels organized but not too studied, when it
Right.
feels, you know, natural, but it feels also there's an architecture to it. You know, you can feel that it's been, you know, there's the hand has been involved. You know, it's not just, it didn't just happen, but
Exactly.
there's a,
You know,
you
there's,
know,
I'm going to
that
paraphrase it
nuance
wrong.
is so important, I think.
It
You
is.
know,
It's a quote that I'm going to get wrong, but it's given, it's a Picasso quote where, you know, learn the rules like a master and break them like an artist.
yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think
I'm
that
close.
no. That's I think you may have hit it right on. It is, you know, I think you know, I always say like you have to learn the rules, you know, so you know how to break them. Really, is what is really, you know, to be a great modernist. I think you really should really understand sort of classical order and design in architecture, and you can apply that formality to a garden, to paintings, to room layouts, to furniture details and design. It's really, it's a very it's a tool, you know, it's a great thing to understand. And one of the things that I noticed with your work, and let me say this, one of the things that I think I've taken away in my mind when I see your work is that there's a looseness to it, which I sort of associate with a lot of English influence in gardens, is that sort of like very almost, you know, like it's just a little crazy, but there's also a real sort of order in what you do. There's a clarity and there's an intent, you know, and I see that as well. And it feels like you're playing with that line. And is that other you know, influence, is that more of a Parisian or a French influence? Is that more of just a modernist influence? How do you describe that?
Well, that's absolutely from John Brooks. So
Yeah.
we would draw endlessly, finding the line, let's say, in the alphabet, drawing it perfectly 1 inch wide, you know, just endlessly drawing on grids, the grid system, and never allowing any line to be triangular or to not be a full part of a circle or a full
Right.
part of a sphere, because those areas are hard to maintain, they're hard to plant, and
Right.
they're also going to get so blended if you plant it properly that if you don't have a strong geometry starting out with planting design and you do like a little curvy line, you're going to lose it all. So you have to
Right.
make very strong, you know, symmetrical, geometrical movements. And
Right.
you have to then be able to put the grid at a 45 or at a 30 and bring it back together. And in those days, you know, I ended up on CAD, of course, but in those days you had to do that with grid, drawing your grid on the drawing, using a compass, using all of those things that
Right.
make you pay attention to the
Right.
line, always to
Right.
the line. You know, now with CAD, you can snap on your axial lines and get going.
You just get going.
But what I really realized and why I went to England was that, you know, there is no classical garden education in the universities in America. I mean, you've got Notre Dame, you've got Georgia
Right.
Tech, you've got classical architecture, but you have landscape architecture training, which is basically, and I get the portfolios all the time from students, there's either a waterfront restoration or it's
Right.
a hike in the woods or it's some made up project that's
Right.
a public memorial or something, but nobody is actually talking about how you do a classic design, and
Right.
and it's not taught. And
It's so interesting. Why? Let me ask you a question. Why do you? Was it just that it became more practical at a certain level? Was it more about a solution-based sort of education, or was it about landscaping? Was really just as kind of like an element that would be added on after? Did it become an afterthought? Like, why do you think it didn't get that attention?
Well, I think landscape architecture, the licensed as a profession, has a lot of trouble knowing what it is. When it started in the 1890s, and you had Beatrix Ferrand, who was one of the first landscape architecture site, female, it was very much women's work, right? That did the
Right.
homes, right?
Right. Same
And-
with design. And same with design, interior design. By the way, that was
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Because it was for the home. And then
Right.
I think part of it, this is my own view, developed where it's very kind of hard to say, all right, I'm going to put $200,000 into my kids' education, but they're basically going to be a guy with a truck with daylilies. Like,
Right,
where
right,
is
right.
that difference? Like,
Right.
are they going to, you know, nobody wants to plant the garden, really. They want to either come up with the best
Right.
waterfront restoration or some sort of mind-blowing large project, but nobody says, this is fantastic to do homes.
Got it. Right.
You know,
Right.
and at least in architecture school they do.
Right.
And
Well, that's
it's a
interesting.
big empty part of the education.
And let me ask you another question. I mean, I think one of the things you're talking about is sort of approaching the landscape architecture with, you know, with sort of your plan and you're laying it out. But you're also, one of the things that I think, you know, it adds another layer to it is you're also dealing with the architecture of what that landscape is being involved with. Also, you're dealing with some of the existing sort of plantings and foliage that is already there, that is
Right.
part of sort of that you might look at and think that piece, you know, that it probably was original. It probably was something that was already here, and it's amazing, and or it was thoughtfully sited back, you know, when it was originally planted, and it still has, you know, a ways to go. So I think, you know, it's an interesting thing to that for when I see landscape architects look at not only sort of what the architect and the designer sort of accomplish with the home, but then also looking at sometimes the property that may or may not have been really ever done properly for that house, that location, the views, the sun setting, sun rising, all of those moments, and then trying to, you know, sort of work within that, you know, kind of keeping some of that and making it and making that part of the new point of view, do you think that it makes it more sort of unique and special to do that and gives it a quirkiness? Or do you think is that something you like to just start over?
Unique and special and quirky,
I
because
think so too.
a
Yeah.
large tree, you can't light small trees. You can't light evergreens.
Yeah.
In the evening, if you don't have large trees, you're missing
Yeah.
so much charm and so much
Yeah.
magic. And I don't care if
I
it's in
know.
the wrong place,
Yeah.
because there is no wrong place for big, beautiful trees,
Yeah.
right?
I
Except
have a beautiful tree on my property in my house upstate, and gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous oak tree that one of the large limbs came down this winter, and was very sad. And I was considering wiring it so that to support this the year before, and I thought, I'm going to wait until we do finish some other work on the property, and it was a bad idea. But anyways, I lost one of them. I'm going to still save the tree, but it was kind of one of those.
well, it will be very robust if it's healthy. We had a center oak on a project, and it's in a little video we made actually. And I'm sorry, it's an elm. And the huge storm, Sandy, came through, split it in half, and we were devastated. I mean, absolutely devastated. And I had my tree rabbi in, and he's like, "Don't do a thing. Don't do a thing. Don't feed it. It was never fed. Don't water it. It was never watered. Leave it alone." And it really put out a lot of new growth. And if you hadn't seen the tree before, it is amazing.
That's amazing. Isn't that
And
great?
it was
Okay,
there
well, good.
since the red
So you will
coats
be
were
my
here.
tree rabbi today, because I'm going to
Yeah,
keep.
don't start doing.
I've already
things to it.
decided to keep it, and we've already started talking about how we're going to address it. But
Right.
it is, it's amazing. I have another couple of trees that just have to come down, but they're just too close to the house and too big. But it is always amazing to me working on projects and seeing sometimes how amazing it is, the way that things that are existing and things that maybe you didn't even realize how beautiful they were really come to life through the eyes of the landscape designer, which I think is so amazing. So you remember wanting to be, you remember as a very young child, sort of this floral moment, this peonies moment possibly. And then you remember loving, design as a young person growing up in the city, and having all of these amazing opportunities to work in a space that was like, would be someone's dream to be able to do that for a month, once in their life, to be able to do that, for years and really build your career. It's not surprising that you've done so many amazing things. What made you decide you opened your company in 1984,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Janice Parker Landscape Design opened in 1984.
Correct.
How did you make that leap? How did you go from sort of studying and apprenticing and, traveling and going into gardens and studying them and working for other people? Was it scary going off on your own? Was it a project
Not at all.
with you? How did you do that?
Not at all. I think that entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And there's the old saying, right, that we're willing to work 100 hours a week in our basement for no money versus 40 hours a week for a paycheck. It didn't bother me at all. I was in a landscape architecture firm, and I studied everything I could study there. And as a matter of fact, the woman who trained me works for me today. She hasn't been with me that whole time, but I met her at the beginning of my career. And she's probably the best landscape architect, Ann Schmidt, that I have ever worked with.
That's amazing.
She's amazing. And I learned what I could learn there. But the principal of the firm, I'm like, I can't hook my wagon here.
Right.
There's no way this is going in the direction I want to go.
Right.
And I was lucky in that, because I was in New York, and people and you meet people, and I knew a lot of theater people. I knew a lot of people in the music profession, a lot of people on Broadway. And I got offered some projects, and I had studied, and I had learned to draw, and I had studied with John Brooks. And I thought, this will be great, because I'll have winters off and I can have a family, and I won't work, every holiday in the floral industry. You're just working 90 hours a week. Was normal, right? And of course, it was completely not true because you worked, year round. But I had this fantasy, and this would be a fantastic idea.
And then you won't work in the right. You're probably, I know.
Same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. But it was so magnificent a journey. I think it takes a long, like at least 25 years, and young people, just close your ears, to make a master, to get started. So I think like it's in Martha Graham is saying that about dancers, right? It takes 12 years. You get bitten by the bug, you fall madly in love with it, you can't stop doing it, you think about it all the time, you learn. And then at some point, around 12 years, you look at your line or what you're doing, and you fall in love with that. And then
your
journey that's about maybe 12 years long to master your voice, right?
So you're saying it takes about 12 years to figure out what you want to do, and then it takes you 12 years to sort of
12 years to gather the skills.
Right.
12 years to really gather the skills in which you should be working and designing. And I was finding
and then another 12 years to become sort of a master. So about 24 years.
Of your way.
Right. Got it.
Of your way.
Got it.
Because you got to learn.
I will tell you,
everything.
I think you're spot on when I look at, if I compare that to sort of my journey where I am, and I think that in a few years I would say, I would be my 24th year in sort of this space. And I think that, I agree with you. I think you get to a point where you sort of understand your point of view. You understand sort of, I just think it's more holistic at that point. I think I think you're firing on all your cylinders, hopefully.
Hopefully, because you're very close to Alzheimer's at that point. So you better know it inside out. Do you know what I mean? Because,
the good news is you might not even remember.
I made my career on a photographic memory, and now I'm like, huh?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting? I do notice that I'm the same way. We were actually talking about that the other day with Rosalie in my office, is that sort of the way I see things and I remember things visually. But that I still do, but I definitely names, I'm like, names it's just, some days I'm like, I have to remember my name.
Right, well, because you're keeping other information in there that you're accumulating, and we're always learning. We're always training. We're always training. And I say that to all the young people that come and work here. I'm still training. We're always training, right? And at a certain point, like things like names don't matter.
Well, let me ask you a question. What was and I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I wanted to ask you, was there a project when you did go off on your own? Maybe it was the first project, second, third, fourth, but was there a project where you were like, now I'm moving, like now this is for real. Like, this is my first real thing. This is the thing that really gave you, was that would you consider it your first project? Would you consider it your first memorable or kind of substantial project? What was that?
They were all interesting. I have to say that I have been blessed with wonderful clients and wonderful referrals. I think my second year doing this, Clodagh recommended me to Robert Redford. I mean,
I love Clodagh. She's such a sweetheart.
It's just like I've always had these wonderful moments. But when I got out of this doing only terraces in New York work and started doing some large work, I did a big house and it was at that time Stonehill Partners, and it was in New Jersey, in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, and I decided I would search for very specific plants and dig them out of people's yards if they would sell them to me. Now, this is a relatively common thing now, and there's like specialty nurseries and everything. But I remember I was pretty skilled at drawing and pretty skilled at understanding the construction process. I was blessed to have met a very good landscape and masonry company who were also starting out when I was younger, who I still work with 40 years later. And they taught me everything, and all the workmen and artisans in the field taught me everything. They were happy to teach me. And I actually put all the pieces together, I felt in a very, like in my way, right? In my way. And I started doing sepia blueprints instead of blueprints and hand watercoloring them and, you know, really sort of made the entire project like
You kind of
just,
personalized it, right? You gave it a sensibility.
and then
Right,
I
and sort of a
started
point of view.
drawing specialized title blocks for everybody.
Oh,
And
nice.
and
That's
then
really
I, you
amazing.
know, yeah.
Do you still do that? Do you still do that? Or
You know, no, because we're like, I'm
you're all
dad.
digital, right? We're
But,
digital.
you know, I remember
We're
us
digital
working.
and hand, and we're working with some architects that only draw in hand, which is amazing to me. And then they convert it. But it's interesting to see. What's interesting to me is it's not just people that grew up drawing by hand. It's even some people that grew up drawing with digitally are you know, they kind of create that sort of interesting mix.
John Brooks insisted that I go take life drawing. That if
Yeah.
I was going to continue on this and drafting, that I would get too uptight, I would get too rigid. And so I would go to life drawing classes.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic experience.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it
great.
was just incredible.
Yeah. We used
We
to have
would
to have
draw
a
the
sketchbook.
bones. We would draw everything.
Yeah, we had to have a sketchbook in school, and we had to submit it every week. It was just, you know, when we were out with friends or when we were sitting on the quad or whatever it was, we just kind of, or sometimes in class we would just go somewhere to draw. So just to kind of keep us a little bit, get us into that headspace, you know. And I do sketch a lot, which I find it very cathartic, and
Yes.
you know, I start thinking and I solve a lot of problems about things that have nothing to do with what I'm drawing, you know, in terms of the design process.
Exactly.
It's just kind of
Exactly.
getting into that
Sometimes
headspace, which
Yeah.
is so interesting. So what role, I mean, so, you know, in landscape, you know, we are so lucky to be designing these beautiful homes for so many people, whether they're city homes or country homes, beach homes, you know, whatever. What role do you think landscape architecture plays in that residential setting in terms of, you know, is it about creating outdoor rooms? Is it about, you know, how would you, is there a way to encapsulate that in a short answer, or it's something that's?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, again, the collaborative process and being the nexus where the architect, the interior designer, the civil engineer, the builder, where we can really become the glue that brings it up out of the ground, you know, in the right place. We spend a ton of our time permitting too. And then brings, you know, the soil, the basically the site gets destroyed and we put it back.
Right.
And we protect it during the process.
And you protect what needs to be protected.
We protect it during the process. And we look and see a vision and we stick really strongly to it, to seeing the end, you know, seeing all the way through the construction to the end. And very much taking our cues from the interior designer for the outside.
Right. And vice versa, I think. And let me tell you, you know, it's interesting. Another sort of conversation that I had recently with a client that I've worked with before, who's now back. We're doing a new project, and this is a much bigger project. And she said to me, you know, when do you think? This is someone I want to introduce you to. She said, when do you think that we should bring in a landscape person? And I said, you're building a team. You know, you're really building a team. And you may not need all of the team players on the field at the same time in the beginning, but it's good to have the team set up. And the little bit that you do need each team member for in the beginning to work together, it just means that when it's that team member's moment to start to come into play, they've been able to be a part of the journey, so that there's really everything is in place for them when it's their moment. And I said, and quite honestly, I just think that we feed off of each other, we creatively, and we also, you know, I said, so much of the experience of a home, let's say, is you're looking out and also the architecture you're looking kind of at, and the landscaping you're looking through. And so it's, I said that all of those three things need to work together. They need to go like this. So it's really wonderful to create a team where there's a mutual respect and appreciation, and there's an overall sort of understanding architecturally, design wise, sort of what the vibe and the sensibility is, so that it tells that story both inside and out, both hardscape and softscape, and also so that there's these wonderful surprises and interesting things that happen that make it feel like it has a soul.
Absolutely. I've learned so much from interior designers, and so often I feel if they aren't, they should be, like design director of the project, because
Yes,
interior designers really understand how someone's going to live in their house,
right.
and we don't come inside and understand everything. I mean, we might, we do see your plans and see furniture layouts, but you've had discussions and long-term relationships with clients talking about where they sit in the evening, where they're having coffee in the morning, what
Right.
are they going to look out and see here and there. And,
Right.
we can bring, well, you're going to, in the morning, you're going to see this. I mean, we can have such a dialogue about those things, but you're creating the magic that they're going to live in. That's so
Yes.
important, right? And that's like so important. People understand that and they really want it. And very often, until recently, when we've been able to do more real life renderings, I feel like people are like, well, they don't want to tell me they can't read the plans, and they don't want to tell me they don't really understand what we're doing, but they don't. Do you know what I mean?
No. It is hilarious. I know.
They
They're like,
don't.
oh, I love that. But it is very funny. Sometimes, clients will say, this is kind of, this is a foreign language to me, and they will admit it, and you can really communicate more clearly to them when you understand that. But sometimes you have clients that will say things like, oh, I'm a very visual person, but I have to see it. And I'm like, well, that means you're not a visual person.
That's like
A visual person can't
That's
see.
like the architect who says, I love to collaborate as long as I can do it by myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. I have that as clients as well. That's so funny.
Yeah, but it's, it's absolutely, the truth that people have a very, very hard time understanding what we're going to do outside, especially
Yes.
when the site becomes completely destroyed.
Yes, no, 100%. And sort of, that's sort of our, talking a little bit about the residential approach to landscape. But one of the things that you're on the board of trustees for the Bette Midler restoration project, right?
Yes.
And so, you work in commercial, that sort of commercial space, or in those public spaces. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I mean, what's your vision of public space and that whole world, and your experience with the foundation, with the restoration?
Well, creating beautiful residential projects is my business, but the greening movement and social activism is my purpose.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
And I've been involved with the NYRP, New York Restoration Project, for almost 22 years. I knew Bette Midler for a long time through other connections. And my respect for her perseverance, because doing a nonprofit that is innovative, that doesn't fit any particular mold, that is exploring what it can do, is generally they close.
Right.
Generally, founders will just take their choice and go, because there are so many obstacles to becoming effective, to getting the Parks Department to give you properties to take care of, to getting the Parks Department to believe that you have credibility. It takes a long time to have credibility and to stick it out. And what NYRP has been able to do is we supported the Parks Department so much during COVID. And during COVID, we had our gardens, they closed parks. We had our gardens open with limited attendance, but we grew 90,000 pounds of produce. We helped feed people. We are, we have 52 gardens throughout the city, and they are absolutely essential to those neighborhoods. And we've been able to keep going. And it's become even more recognized at how important these spaces have become because of COVID. so many people come to me who I've worked with for years, and so many new people say, you know, suddenly outdoors is safer than indoors, and
Yeah.
always indoors was where you sheltered.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden people
Isn't
are
that
like,
interesting?
outdoors is safe. I'm safe to sit outside and talk with my friends. I'm safe, and you know, and
Right.
you know, I'm sure the lead time on furniture now and getting things from the outside is so hard. I tell people, just take your dining room table outside. Just
Yeah,
go
bring it
out.
out.
Just, you know, carry it out. It was good enough for Russia, you know, for the SARS
Yeah.
of Russia. Take your rug, take your furniture out. You
I
guys.
love when people whenever, you know, I do it all the time, but I love when I go to other people's homes and when they have a great outdoor event, they do bring some things that are clearly not for the outdoors. It makes
Oh
it
my
feel
God,
kind of
yes.
special. It changes it. It kind of adds another quirky, fun, interesting layer to that.
Well,
What?
it's so delicious. It's like in that movie. Did you see the movie Call Me by Your Name?
Oh no, I did
And
not.
it was in this Italian villa that,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Italian landscapes always look like the gardener left about a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's just got this fantastic, unkempt look. Do you know what I mean? And underneath every tree or anything on uneven grade was great old furniture that they would just sit on and talk, just placed all over the, you
Yeah.
know, the landscape.
And kind right, creating these little moments.
And it all was by bringing a great chair and a table and maybe some candles, and it could have been anywhere, right? And I tell people, go sit under that tree. Just take the table and sit under the tree. You don't need a terrace. You don't need any of those things.
Right. You could just right in the landscape, in the lawn.
Just get out there. Yeah.
What do you think the relationship between the landscape and the architecture, let's say, whether it's public or residential, how do you approach that? Like, is there like a starting point for you? Like when you kick off your project that you are looking at that moment, and is there an inspiration in that, or is it about softening it or just understanding the architecture?
It's their vision.
Yeah.
Right? It's their vision. It's the client's vision. I need to know the interior designers. It's a vision, and we need to know what it is so we can play with it. We can develop it. We can highlight it. We can enhance it. It's absolutely important. I mean, I need to know everyone's point of view because I love learning it, and I love working with different ones. It keeps it so interesting. I mean, it's so much more interesting for me. If I want to do my own garden, I just do my own garden, you know?
Right. I love that you're personalizing it for the client, for their point of view, for the location. Are there typical mistakes sometimes that you come across in what you do that make it difficult for you to bring it to the level you want to bring it to, or is there a mistake that homeowners make when hiring a landscape architect?
Well, you know, it's a funny thing. Driveways are important.
Yes.
Really good driveways and really good commodious ways in circulation to get in and out of a house. Pinch points are important. You know, someone could have an acre or 3 acres, but still get the house as close to the property line setback as possible. I have no way to get, you know, free and clear circulation around a house. And sometimes you can't.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes the best gardens you'll ever do are in a brownstone, you know, and it's just sitting in the back because it's just so lovely. But, you know, there are some of those layout problems that I can't do a lot about.
Right.
And grading and slopes and all of that kind of thing is expensive. Drainage is expensive. All of the things that are underground that bring no real joy to the client.
Right.
Yeah,
I know. I just had a conversation about swells, about drainage swells.
Yeah, it's so important to get all of those things done when it's all being mobilized and planned. And the only place you can get in real trouble with landscape is water.
Yeah. Great.
And that's real trouble.
Not only for your property, but for the adjoining properties.
Yeah.
You can create. Sometimes when people they put in a new driveway or a pool or something, it really changes the way that everything has been draining for years, and it can be a problem. I've experienced that personally and also with clients. Is there like something that was like the craziest thing that a client ever asked for in terms of landscape that was really amazing or interesting or wacky or funny?
Oh, yeah. There are so many moments. By the way,
Yeah.
we're doing this phenomenal sort of small palace, actually, outside of Moscow. And they have many hammams and spas, but they're doing a spa that has a glass roof that opens so that when it snows, the snow will come in the house.
I love that. I do love that. I actually go to a spa upstate where they serve drinks at this sort of outdoor, sort of hot tubby pool, very small little thing, but they serve drinks in it while it's snowing and the fireplace and the roof is open. It's really kind of great.
You know what happens? Because this is what happens to us. I'm like, I look at new house plans now and I say, they don't have a snow spa?
Yeah.
No, it's nothing.
It's so, yeah.
This is ridiculous.
They have not thought of everything. Are there rules are there any sort of rules that you can share with us in landscape design, or do you think or are there not rules? Is there a fundamental rule that you go by?
A fundamental rule. Well, a fundamental rule that I go by. You know, when you said there's got to be a balance, if you're in the Northeast, of evergreens, of structure, you know, and I agree with some of the really historic landscape architects like Ellen Biddle Shipman and Beatrix Ferrand, because it's been a really important to me to research them and study them, that a garden there's parts of a garden need to be enclosed or it's not a garden.
Right. It needs to be, right.
And it's great,
outdoor
all this
space.
meadow planting and all these beautiful works by Pia Rodolph, who I respect and who I think is phenomenal. But at the same time, we need to have some bones to our gardens. And that needs to be there 12 months a year. Yeah. And you need to, I think, and I do this, and it's pretty strict, so I have to be careful when I say it, but I don't believe in color in the front yard unless it's in shrubs and trees. I don't want sides and backs. Yeah,
I love that. You know what? I do not have any color in front of my house.
I don't like it. You can't have the arrival moment dependent on flowers blooming.
Yeah.
It has to look good in the winter. It has to look good all the time.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't stop people from putting out pots, but you know, it's very funny. A couple just asked me to do another house for them. I did a house for them 12 years ago. And they said, you know, it really shocked us when you said we couldn't have flowers in the front, but we went ahead and worked with you anyway.
That's hilarious. Well, last question, because we are going to be on, they're going to kick us off in about 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
How would you describe your style or aesthetic as a landscape designer?
Romantic.
Nice. Okay, I love that. That's awesome. Janice, I have to tell you, you're amazing. You're not only an amazing talent, but you're an absolute delight to talk with. And I feel like this was one of my favorite sessions ever, because I feel like I have such a better understanding of sort of where you're coming from, but also I feel like I've learned a lot. So thank you. This is really awesome. And I'll be calling you separately because I'd like to introduce you to somebody.
Oh, here's Penny.
Oh my God. Hey puppy. I know my puppies are at home right now.
Who probably can live in an office without them?
They're probably spelling their name and poop in the living room in cursive because I have to be there soon. But anyways, big kiss, Janice. Thank you so much.
Big kiss to you. And
this
go
has
make
been
love
so
to
much
your garden.
fun. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for all of your knowledge. And I'm reaching out to you. Swear to God.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, sweetie. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Have a great post nor'easter. Bye.
Bye-bye.